Egypt and the Second World War, Battleground and Burden. The Second World War, 1939 to 1945, was a global conflict that reshaped the political and social landscapes of numerous nations. While Egypt was not a principal combatant, it played a crucial strategic role due to its geographical location, its hosting of major British naval bases, and its control of the Suez Canal, a vital artery for the British Empire. Egypt's involvement in the war was marked by significant military engagements on its soil and by profound social, economic, and political effects on its people. Egypt's strategic importance and military engagements. Egypt's strategic importance stemmed primarily from the Suez Canal, which was essential for maintaining British colonial communications and supply routes to India, the Middle East, and the Far East. Although Egypt was formally independent, the country's sovereignty was significantly compromised by the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty of 1936. Under this agreement, Britain retained the right to station troops in Egypt and maintain control over the Suez Canal zone in exchange for supporting Egypt's entry into the League of Nations and recognizing its nominal independence. This treaty effectively aligned Egypt with the Allied powers during the war, despite considerable domestic opposition to British presence. The most significant military engagements in Egypt were part of the Western Desert Campaign between Axis and Allied forces. The two most notable battles were the First and Second Battles of El Alamein in 1942. The first battle, fought in July, halted the advance of German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps towards Alexandria and the Nile Delta. However, it was the Second Battle of El Alamein, from October to November 1942, that marked a turning point in the North African campaign. Under the command of General Bernard Montgomery, the British Eighth Army launched a successful offensive that decisively defeated the Axis forces and began their retreat westward into Libya, the Italian sabotage at Alexandria. In addition to conventional battles, Egypt was also the site of covert and unconventional warfare. One of the most dramatic episodes occurred on the night of December 18th and 19th, 1941, when 6 Italian naval commandos of the Decima Flottiglia Emmaus, using human torpedoes also known as Maiali, infiltrated the port of Alexandria. The operation was a bold act of sabotage aimed at crippling British naval power in the eastern Mediterranean. The Italian divers managed to attach limpet mines to the British battleships HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Valiant, as well as a tanker and a destroyer, though the ships did not sink outright. Owing to the shallow depth of the harbor, the damage was severe, putting both battleships out of action for months. The operation, while not altering the strategic balance significantly, was a propaganda victory for Italy and a stunning display of naval daring. It also exposed vulnerabilities in Allied defenses within Egyptian territory, increasing anxiety among both military and civilian populations. Life behind the lines, espionage and cultural shifts. Beyond the battlefield, Egypt became a center of intrigue, transformation, and tension. Cairo, in particular, was a hub of espionage. German and Italian agents attempted to destabilize British control by aligning with Egyptian nationalist groups, while the British established extensive counterintelligence networks to neutralize such threats. The city's hotels, bars, and cafes were often gathering points for spies, soldiers, and diplomats engaged in clandestine operations. Culturally, wartime Cairo was paradoxical. It hosted a flourishing nightlife scene, attracting foreign soldiers and expatriates, even as ordinary Egyptians grappled with shortages and repression. The war stimulated a rise in Egyptian journalism, literature, and political debate, with intellectuals like Taha Hussein and Salama Musa advocating for reform, education, and independence. This period laid some of the intellectual groundwork for post-war political movements and nationalist awakening. Among the most influential voices during this period were Taha Hussein and Salama Musa, two towering figures in modern Egyptian intellectual history. Taha Hussein, often referred to as the Dean of Arabic literature, was a blind scholar and author who championed education, rationalism, and cultural reform. During the war years, he used his platform in journalism and academia to criticize ignorance, call for wider access to education, and advocate for the modernization of Egyptian society. His writing underscored the importance of independent thought and democratic values at a time when authoritarianism and colonialism still dominated the region. Salama Musa, a journalist, thinker, and social reformer, was similarly outspoken. A fervent advocate for secularism, scientific thinking, and social justice, Musa believed that the war exposed Egypt's dependence on foreign powers and the need for intellectual and industrial self-sufficiency. He promoted women's rights, workers' rights, and the separation of religion from state governance. His columns during the war criticized both the British and the complacency of Egypt's ruling elite, laying ideological groundwork for post-war nationalist and socialist movements. Together, Hussein and Musa represented a generation of thinkers who used the instability of wartime as a catalyst to press for progressive reforms that would reshape Egypt in the decades that followed. Effects on the Egyptian people. The war years placed an enormous strain on Egyptian society. Economically, the war caused inflation, shortages of basic goods, and disruption of trade. With much of the country's resources redirected to support the British war effort, the Egyptian population faced rising food prices, unemployment, and housing crises, especially in urban centers like Cairo and Alexandria. Socially, the presence of large numbers of foreign troops, British, Australian, New Zealand, South African, and Indian soldiers, created tensions with local communities. These tensions were sometimes cultural, sometimes economic, and occasionally led to outright conflict. For many Egyptians, the war intensified feelings of nationalism and resentment toward continued British influence. In terms of human cost, Egypt experienced a modest but not insignificant number of deaths. Although not directly involved in frontline combat, Egypt contributed thousands of laborers and auxiliary personnel to the British war effort, many of whom worked under harsh and dangerous conditions. Civilian deaths also occurred due to air raid, displacement, and wartime shortages. Historical estimates suggest that between 4,000 and 8,000 Egyptians died during the course of the war, including both civilians and those in support or labor roles. While small compared to the losses of major combatant nations, the toll was a sobering reminder of Egypt's vulnerability and sacrifice in a global conflict it did not choose. Wartime also saw a subtle transformation in the role of Egyptian women. With men away or conscripted into labor service, women became more active in maintaining families, communities, and even public welfare institutions. Female volunteers joined charitable organizations and helped care for the wounded. Though their involvement remained largely domestic, the war marked an early shift in gender roles that would influence post-war feminist and nationalist movements. Politically, the war exposed the fragility of Egypt's semi-independence. Although King Farouk attempted to navigate a neutral path, British control over the military and foreign policy left little room for true autonomy. Although the aspirations of controlling Egypt and the Suez Canal by the Italian leader Mussolini would make it hard for Egypt to remain neutral in the war, even without the presence of the British in Egypt, it was still a point of strategic interest that would have likely drawn Egypt into conflict due to its geographic importance and the competing ambitions of Axis and Allied powers. However, the occupation of Egypt by Allied forces without its full consent galvanized political movements, particularly among the youth and intellectuals. The war period witnessed the growth of nationalist and anti-colonial sentiments, setting the stage for the 1952 revolution and the eventual end of the monarchy. Conclusion. While Egypt was not a belligerent in the traditional sense during the Second World War, it bore the heavy burdens of a nation at war. Its territory became a critical theater of conflict, and its people suffered both directly and indirectly from the consequences of global warfare. The Anglo-Egyptian Treaty in 1936 effectively brought Egypt into the Allied sphere, but also underscored the limits of its independence. The battles fought on Egyptian soil, particularly at El Alamein, the daring Italian sabotage at Alexandria, and the covert world of espionage in Cairo were emblematic of the wider struggle for control of the Mediterranean. The war's deeper legacy in Egypt was the acceleration of social and political change, fueled by the hardships endured and the aspirations awakened during this tumultuous period. Please like and subscribe for more content like this.